Tried to balance my friendship with Ben and dating Chris, but Chris's sudden jealousy is threatening everything I cherished. Ben and I have been friends for a little over 5 years now. During that time, we dated twice, but neither time lasted more than 3 months, once from December 2015 to February 2016, then again for a short stint in May 2017. Both breakups were amicable, and we quickly realized we functioned way better as friends than anything else. Since then, we weren't romantically involved anymore, aside from a quick kiss in a truth or dare game back in September, which honestly just confirmed to me that I feel nothing romantic for Ben. We have a ton in common and know each other inside out, to the point where my friends joke that I can read his mind, which isn't true, but I do feel a kind of comfort with him I don't have with many people. We get through dark times together. He's one of my closest friends, and yes, he just happens to be my ex. We always laugh about our failed attempts at dating, throwing around lines like "what were we thinking?" and "been there, done that, fool me twice." By now, the idea of dating again is honestly just a punchline, and we both know we'd never try it. Things took a turn in late October when I met Chris at a party. We connected immediately, had a deep conversation, and ended the night hooking up. We didn't talk much at first afterward, but by late November we started seeing more of each other. It wasn't anything official, we hadn't had that talk yet, but we both agreed we liked where things were. Fast forward to New Year's Eve. My best friend and her boyfriend decided to throw a party and invited all of us, plus dates. I thought this would be the perfect chance for Chris to meet my friends. Ben was invited too, of course, so before the party, I let Chris know that my ex and close friend would be there. He told me he wasn't bothered and, since we weren't official anyway, it shouldn't matter. I loved how easygoing he seemed about it but told him if he felt uncomfortable, he could always talk to me, no need to play cool. The night of the party was great. I introduced Chris as the guy I've been dating for a month, drinks flowed, everyone mingled, Chris seemed to fit right in, and I got to catch up with my friends. When midnight struck, I kissed Chris to ring in the year, then went around hugging all my friends and wishing them well, the usual. Nobody left before 5 in the morning, that's how much fun we had. The next day, Chris called to say he'd had a good time and thanked my friend for the invite. My best friend later told me how lovely Chris was, joking that I'd better make it official soon before someone else swiped him away. It seemed like, on all fronts, first impressions were a success. The first sign anything was off came when I met Ben for coffee on Sunday. Naturally, the party came up and I asked how he felt about Chris. Ben hesitated, then admitted he thought Chris was kind of frosty towards him. I decided to give Chris the benefit of the doubt. There were a ton of people there, and maybe he just hadn't had the chance for a real conversation with Ben. I told Ben he was probably just reading into it, and we moved on, not mentioning Chris the rest of the afternoon. Then, last night, I was at Chris's place after dinner. We were winding down, getting ready to watch a movie before bed, and he asked about my weekend plans. I told him some friends and I were going out for drinks on Saturday for a birthday. He asked if Ben would be there. Not thinking much of it, I said yes. Suddenly, everything blew up. Chris turned passive-aggressive and started in about how much time I spend with Ben, claiming I must love him if we're together so much, complaining that I'd hugged Ben for too long on New Year's, and that I always spend more time with Ben than with him. I was so stunned. Here was someone who, just days ago, told me he wasn't bothered by Ben at all, and now this? I tried to reason with him, pointing out that in the weeks since we started dating, I had hung out with Ben maybe 3 times, once at a group Christmas celebration, once at New Year's, and one-on-one for coffee, and that I hugged all my friends at the party, not just Ben. I insisted I had no feelings for Ben. But Chris got more and more defensive, arguing that even if I didn't have feelings for Ben, Ben definitely still had the hots for me. That's when I got angry. If Chris trusted me so little, it seemed pointless to keep going. I told him as much. He said he didn't want to break up, neither did I, honestly, and told me he saw a future with me if it weren't for Ben. I explained that Ben is my friend, and I'm not going to ditch someone who's important to me for the sake of a guy who's already so insecure just a month in. I didn't spend the night. I went home, feeling torn. I really like Chris, but ditching a friend is a total deal-breaker for me. This morning, he texted and asked if we could talk. I haven't responded. My head's all over the place. I don't want things with Chris to end. Everything was amazing until now. But I can't lose Ben, either. Later, after thinking things over, I decided to talk things through with Chris. We had a calm conversation, and he apologized for lashing out. I admitted that I should have been more thoughtful about how he might feel in this situation. As we talked, some things came up that put everything in a new perspective, and I know I'll need a few days to process it all. For what it's worth, my interaction with Ben feels natural to me. I didn't even think about how it might look from an outsider's perspective. I barely had time to speak with Ben at the party. Most of my attention was on Chris and making sure he felt included, and I spent more time with my girlfriends that night. I hope my friends don't tease me about Ben being my soulmate in front of Chris, but I probably should have warned them to cool it, just in case. Aside from an occasional hug, Ben and I almost never have any physical contact. And honestly, 4 months total of failed dating attempts doesn't exactly make for a deep romantic history. I come from a pretty close-knit group of friends, and we're all pretty open with one another. I never felt like I treated Ben any differently from the rest of the group. But recently, things with Chris, the guy I was seeing, took an unexpected turn. Chris seriously overreacted, his jealousy erupted out of nowhere, and he didn't handle it well at all. Tonight, I'm planning to meet up with him to see if we can talk things through. I really want to approach this with some insight and try to understand where his concerns are coming from, but at the same time, I hope he'll apologize. I need him to understand that Ben is my friend, part of my life, and I won't let anyone dictate my friendships. Looking back, I've only dated 2 other guys aside from Chris and Ben. The first was in July 2016. We barely had anything in common, so it fizzled out early. In fact, things ended before he ever got to meet my friends. Then there was the second guy, from September 2017 to March 2018. He met Ben a couple of times and things always stayed civil between them. That guy never struck me as jealous, he just shrugged and said, he can live with it. We never argued about our relationships with other people. That relationship didn't end due to jealousy, it just faded out until neither of us was interested enough to keep working at it. Honestly, I really wanted things to work with Chris. I've never had to deal with jealousy in a relationship before, so all of this totally overwhelmed me. Chris and I have a lot in common, and things had been going well, so well, in fact, that I was just about to ask him if he wanted to be official. Right, before his outburst. Now here I am, just hoping we can recover from this mess, because I really do still like him. Funny enough, that second relationship I mentioned? It actually started up again briefly, months after we first broke up. Someone we barely ever see brought up how it was a shame we weren't together anymore, and it got us talking. We figured we'd give it another shot, but after a month, it was clear it wasn't working. We didn't even sleep together the second time around. Sometimes things just don't click the way you hope. Update 1. The thing about the so-called mind reading between Ben and I has always been so overblown. It's not like we're soulmates or anything, it's just that Ben sometimes fumbles to get his true point across, but I seem to understand him most of the time and can express to others what he meant. I probably shouldn't have let people think it was more than that. Honestly, I could have phrased it a lot better. Also, Chris wasn't my boyfriend. Not officially. We'd only been dating for a month, and we hadn't defined the relationship. For some reason, people think a month means committed, but for us, it didn't. We were just seeing where things might go. Now, let me share how Ben and I wound up dating a second time. An acquaintance once casually remarked what a shame it was that things had never worked out between us. That idea got under our skin, so Ben and I decided to try again. Not even a month later, I blurted out that it didn't feel right. To my relief, he agreed instantly, confessing just how relieved he was that I felt it too. We simply went back to being friends. It was almost effortless, since nothing physical had even happened that whole month. Chris was aware that the second chance with Ben wasn't anything close to serious. I realized, too, that maybe people would wonder why Ben hadn't moved on. Here's what they don't know. Ben was in a relationship from February to June 2018. I actually liked his girlfriend, she was always so sweet to me. Ironically, she ended things because she still had feelings for her ex. So, I figured Ben would be just as over me as she was over him. My close friends have never once brought up my history with Ben or joked about us being together, definitely not at the party that set off all this drama. They genuinely want the best for me, and almost all of them took to Chris instantly. But something did happen at that party, and that bit of chaos is what started all of this. Buckle up. After everything that had happened, and after turning things over in my mind for way too long, I decided to text Chris back. I suggested we talk things out, being civil and adult about it. He agreed. When I got to Chris's place, he opened up immediately. He apologized for how aggressively he'd reacted, and how foolish he felt about not being able to keep control. He said it wasn't fair to mistrust me and that his jealousy was, in his words, ridiculously overblown, especially since we weren't officially together. I told him I understood if he got jealous or uncomfortable. My real hurt was that we hadn't talked about it before things escalated. I apologized for not being intuitive enough to see that even if he said he was fine, he probably wasn't feeling great about it all. I could have tried harder, reassured him, adapted the situation, found a way for both of us to be happy. We both admitted that we'd be genuinely sad if things ended so soon, before they even had a chance to become something real. There was just so much chemistry, so much good between us that deserved another shot. But what really stood in the way of our happy ending now was the awkward conversation we had to have about my friendship with Ben. Before I could even bring it up, Chris just dropped a bomb on me. He told me that at the party, he overheard Ben and Ben's best friend talking. Ben had apparently confessed how awful it was for him to see me with another guy and how unfair it was that we weren't an item. Chris admitted that after hearing that, any insecurity he'd had went straight from 0 to 100. He just saw red. He said he struggled, didn't know if he should tell me. He was afraid it would come down to me believing Ben over him, or that he looked like the jealous guy who ruins friendships. So he bottled everything up until it exploded when I casually mentioned hanging out with Ben. Immediately, my guard shot up. The story sounded too convenient, straight out of some bad sitcom. I remembered a comment I'd heard about manipulative behavior, and I realized I really needed to be cautious. I told him I was going to have to talk to other people, since I couldn't just take his word for it right now, given the circumstances. Chris was surprisingly understanding and told me he'd accept whatever conclusion I came to. He believed he'd lost the right to be involved in this the moment he'd had that jealous outburst. I didn't agree, but he was adamant. I needed to find my truth. We ended the night with a hug, a real one, finally. I told him I genuinely wanted to believe him, wanted to trust what he said, but I was too confused. He assured me he understood and told me to take my time. And then, I went home to unravel everything. And oh boy, did I start putting the pieces together. Suddenly I remembered the party last September, the one where I was dared to kiss Ben. Guess who came up with that dare? Ben's best friend. The same one who, if Chris's story is to be believed, always knows exactly how Ben feels about me. Also, he'd been the one to suggest truth or dare as a game that night, even though he usually hates those games. Then, my mind spun back to Ben's weird reactions whenever I brought up Chris. At the time, I'd thought Ben was just being sensitive, not wanting to offend me. But what if that had all been an elaborate dance, a way for him to get Chris out of the picture? My brain was a storm of overanalysis, replaying every interaction with Ben from the last few months, and I knew I just had to rip the bandage off. I texted Ben and asked if he wanted to come over after work. It was out of the ordinary for us to meet alone at each other's places, so I knew he'd realize something was up. It was awkward, but I'd prepared what I needed to say. I told Ben that I valued our friendship, but I'd started to wonder if he wanted more than what I could offer. I asked him plainly if that was true. Ben, who can't lie well, instantly went on the defensive. He snapped, asking me if Chris was trying to separate us. That's literally the way he phrased it, separate us. I stayed firm. I said Chris wasn't the point. What mattered was if being friends was enough for him. He kept dodging, throwing the question back to me, again and again, trying to change the subject. He even started saying nasty things about Chris, which was wild considering they'd only met once, that night at the party. I was losing patience, getting angry now. I needed an answer, not deflection. Finally, after some back and forth, he snapped. Fine. I thought that we'd eventually get back together and it was only a matter of time until you realized we were meant to be. You should be with me, then we wouldn't have to deal with this. His words echo in my head even now. Like, what? If he'd just had a harmless little crush on me, I could have handled that, but this was something else entirely. Things were always a bit unresolved in my life, but this felt like my entire world had been shattered. I couldn't believe it. After all these years of friendship, he just stuck around, patiently waiting for the moment we might get back together. Everything we'd been through, everything he'd ever done for me, was it all just a plan so I'd eventually realize we should date again? My heart ached as I told him I couldn't return his feelings, not now, not ever. We'd already tried twice before. It hadn't worked out, not for me at least, and I didn't see how that could ever change. I wanted us to stay friends. But deep down, I knew friendship wasn't possible between us anymore, not under these conditions. He got so worked up. Sitting across from him, it was like witnessing someone race through all the stages of grief, except for acceptance. We can still work this out. He pleaded. This is unfair. He shouted, nobody will ever love me. And finally, I'll change. We can try again in a few months. With every argument, my exhaustion only grew. But I stayed calm. Somehow, I found the strength to tell him it would be better if we stopped seeing each other, at least for a long while. I asked him to leave. The door shut behind him and I felt nothing but exhaustion, and honestly, a sense of being creeped out. I felt betrayed, like the person I was closest to and trusted most had always been carrying some secret agenda with me. The pain was overwhelming, so I called my best friend. She could barely understand me through my sobs, but once she heard my voice, she got in the car and came over right away. When I finally managed to tell her what had happened, she was horrified. She'd had no idea. Over the next 2 days, as word spread among our friends, it turned out none of them knew about his feelings, either. Everyone was shocked, some even disgusted, by how he'd acted. But my friends were amazing. Their support kept me from losing my head as I processed all of this. Yesterday, I talked to Chris. I apologized for putting him in such a horrible situation. I never wanted to throw him into this mess right at the start of us becoming something more. He kept insisting I wasn't to blame, but I still wish I'd realized the truth sooner. It had been 5 years of friendship, for Christ's sake. Chris was unbelievably sweet. He ordered takeout from my favorite place, picked a movie for us to watch, and we cuddled up on the sofa together. He told me, as we huddled close, that he was glad we both came out okay, and that somehow everything we'd struggled through was worth it in the end. Then he asked me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I said yes. Update 2. So it's been about 3 weeks since my last update, and honestly, I thought the drama was over. Chris and I had been doing amazing, we were officially together, things felt so natural between us, and I was finally starting to feel like I'd made the right choice. We'd been spending almost every weekend together, and I was actually thinking about introducing him to my parents soon. But then last Tuesday happened, and everything went sideways again. I was at work when I got a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a screenshot of Chris and some girl at what looked like a bar, and they were close. Like, really close. Her hand was on his chest, they were laughing, and honestly, it looked pretty intimate. The message just said, "Thought you should know." Friend, my hands were literally shaking as I stared at the photo. The timestamp showed it was from last Friday night, the same night Chris had told me he was staying in because he had an early work meeting on Saturday. I felt sick. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, but another part of me was terrified that maybe I was overreacting. The photo could have been taken out of context, right? Maybe she was just some friend I didn't know about? But then I remembered something. Last Friday, I'd actually suggested we hang out, and Chris had been really insistent about needing to stay home. He'd even FaceTimed me from his apartment around 8 p.m. to prove he was home. Looking back, that felt calculated. I couldn't focus on work at all. I kept staring at the photo, zooming in, trying to figure out who this girl was. She was really pretty, blonde, probably around my age, and she had this confident smile that made my stomach twist with jealousy. When I got home that evening, I decided I needed to talk to someone before I lost my mind completely. I called my best friend, and when I told her about the photo, she was silent for way too long. "What?" I asked. "You're scaring me." "Okay, don't freak out," she said, "but I think I might know who that is." Apparently, my best friend's boyfriend had mentioned seeing Chris at a bar downtown last Friday with some blonde girl. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it because she figured it was probably just a coworker or something. But now, "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have told you right away." I felt like the world was spinning. Here I was, finally feeling secure in a relationship after all the Ben drama, and now this? I couldn't help but wonder if I was just destined to have terrible luck with guys. That night, I barely slept. I kept going back and forth between being furious and trying to rationalize everything. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Chris would have a perfectly reasonable story. The next day, I decided to just ask him directly. I couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. I texted Chris and asked if he wanted to come over after work. When he showed up, he seemed normal, happy to see me, giving me a kiss hello, asking about my day. For a moment, I almost chickened out. But then I just showed him the photo. His face went completely white. For like 10 seconds, he just stared at my phone without saying anything. Then he sat down heavily on my couch and put his head in his hands. "It's not what it looks like," he finally said, but his voice sounded defeated. "Then what is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. That's when the whole story came out. The girl in the photo was his ex-girlfriend, Emma. They'd dated for 2 years and broke up about 6 months before Chris and I met. Apparently, she'd been texting him on and off since we started dating, but he'd been ignoring her messages. Last Friday, she'd shown up at his apartment unannounced, crying and saying she'd made a huge mistake breaking up with him. She'd convinced him to go get coffee to talk, which turned into drinks, which turned into, well, the scene in the photo. Nothing happened, Chris insisted. I mean, yes, we talked for hours, and yes, she was being flirty and touchy, but I didn't kiss her or anything. I kept thinking about you the whole time. I felt like I was going to throw up. "So you lied to me about staying home?" He nodded miserably. I panicked. I knew how it would look, especially after everything with Ben. I thought I could handle it on my own and you'd never have to know. "Handle what?" I demanded. That's when he admitted that Emma had been trying to win him back for weeks. She'd been sending him long texts about how much she missed him, showing up at his work, even reaching out to his friends to ask about him. He'd been dealing with it alone because he didn't want to stress me out. But Friday night, when she showed up crying, I felt bad for her. She seemed genuinely heartbroken, so I agreed to hear her out, thinking maybe if we talked, she'd finally get closure and leave us alone. And instead, she got closer to you, I said, looking at the photo again. Chris ran his hands through his hair. She kept saying things like how we used to be so good together, how she'd changed, how she realized I was the one. And honestly, for a minute, it was confusing. We did have good times. But then I thought about you, about us, and I knew I didn't want to go back. I was quiet for a long time, processing everything. On one hand, I was hurt that he'd lied to me. On the other hand, after the whole Ben situation, I could kind of understand why he'd been afraid to tell me about his ex trying to win him back. "Who took this photo?" I asked. Chris looked confused. "I have no idea. I didn't see anyone we knew at the bar." That's when a horrible thought occurred to me. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend. "Hey, can you ask your boyfriend exactly what he saw on Friday night? Like, was he at the same bar, or did someone else tell him about it?" She called me back 10 minutes later with information that made my stomach drop. "He wasn't there himself," she said slowly. "Ben told him about it." Ben. Of course it was Ben. My mind started racing. Ben had been completely cut off from our friend group since our confrontation, but apparently he'd been watching from the shadows. He must have followed Chris, taken the photo, and sent it to me anonymously. He was trying to sabotage my relationship, just like Chris had worried he would. When I told Chris about Ben being behind the photo, his face went dark with anger. "That psycho has been stalking us," he said. "This is insane." But here's the thing, even knowing Ben had orchestrated this whole situation, I was still hurt that Chris had lied to me. The photo might have been taken maliciously, but it was still real. Chris had still chosen to go out with his ex and lie to me about it. We ended up talking until almost 2 a.m. Chris apologized over and over, promised he'd never lie to me again, and swore that he'd be completely transparent about Emma going forward. He even offered to show me all their text messages. I wanted to forgive him. I really did. But I also felt exhausted by all the drama. First Ben, now this. I was starting to wonder if I was just meant to be single. I need some time to think, I finally told him. Chris looked devastated, but he nodded. I understand. I messed up, and I have to live with the consequences. That was 4 days ago, and I still don't know what to do. Chris has been texting me every day, not pestering me, just checking in and reminding me that he's there when I'm ready to talk. My friends are split on what I should do. Some think I should dump him for lying, others think Ben's manipulation is the real problem here. Yesterday, something else happened that's made everything even more complicated. Emma reached out to me directly. She found me on social media and sent me a long message basically confessing everything. She said she'd been trying to win Chris back, that she'd manipulated him into meeting her on Friday, and that she'd been testing whether he was really over her. But here's the kicker, she also said that after their conversation that night, Chris had made it crystal clear that he was committed to me and that she needed to respect that. According to her, he'd actually cut the evening short because he felt guilty about lying to me. He's really in love with you, she wrote. I was hoping I could change his mind, but it's obvious that you're all he thinks about. I'm sorry for causing problems in your relationship. So now I'm even more confused. Chris did lie to me, but apparently he was also being honest about his feelings. Emma was definitely trying to sabotage us, but she's also now vouching for Chris's loyalty. And somewhere in the background, Ben is still lurking, taking photos and trying to destroy any happiness I might find. I think I know what I want to do, but I'm scared of making another mistake. After everything that's happened, I just want to be with someone who's honest and straightforward with me. The question is, can Chris be that person, or am I just setting myself up for more heartbreak? I'm meeting Chris for coffee tomorrow. I guess we'll see how this all plays out.